Already. Now, as I said earlier, I invited Ted Sherman along to talk to us today. I'm getting to know Ted through the London Haiku group that I virtually attend. But let me tell you a little bit about him. Like myself, he grew up in London, but has spent the last 11 years living in Bristol, which is in the southwest of England, for those of you who don't know it, with his 3 kids. Alongside poetry, he has a lifelong passion for music and studied at the London College of Music, spending many years playing in bands. Now, he's not been writing haiku for that long, but he's already had some success, having been published in Modern Haiku, Blue Outlier, Seashores, Blithe Spirit, Frog Pond, Prune Juice, Presence, and the Wales Haiku Journal. He's guested on the People's Poetry Podcast, and I'll put the link in the show notes so you can have a listen to it. And of course, he's now agreed to come along and talk to us, but not about his poetry, rather about a project he created and delivers with David Breakspear. It's called the Pen and Corrections Project, which works with serving prisoners in the UK to produce haiku. I thought you might be interested to hear more about it. Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. As you said, I'm here to not talk about my haiku, but to talk about a project which I started during lockdown, and it's called Pen and Corrections. It is a project which is supporting currently incarcerated prisoners to learn about and write their own haiku. So I'm just going to talk quickly about why the project was developed and where it came from, what we did as part of the project, and then what we learned from the project. So, as you said, Patricia, I am relatively new to writing haiku. I guess I started probably at the beginning of the first lockdown, so it's been about a year that I've been writing. And I love haiku, and I wanted to share that love of haiku. I wanted to share how they make me feel. They're really great for my mental health. They help me feel calm, in control, and they're really good at making me very grounded and feel present. So I wanted to share this kind of new love. I also recognize that they're quite an unthreatening form of poetry, quite easy to step into, I guess, but intriguing in their complexity. So I wanted to share this, and I'm the commissioner of adult drug and alcohol treatment services in North Somerset. I've worked in that area for many years now, and I had this idea of sharing or trying to get people in recovery from drug and alcohol problems to write haiku, so to share haiku with them, to teach them and try to get them to write it. So that was my initial thought, was okay, how could I do this? And I also had a bit of a challenge for myself. I was like, I've only been writing for a year. Do I know enough? Could I impart my knowledge about haiku and help people understand them and write them? And would anyone be interested in doing that? So I've titled this slide, "If you ask, you might just get, then what?" So I had this idea. I wanted to write haiku with people recovering from drug and alcohol problems. And then I was listening to the People's Poetry Podcast, which featured David Breakspear, who is a poet who spent many years in prison himself. And so I listened to him talking, and it was an inspirational interview. And I reached out to him via Instagram and said, I've got this idea to write haiku with people in recovery from drug and alcohol problems, but maybe it might work with people in prisons. What do you think? Would you like to come on board with me? And he said yes, which then made me go, okay, now what do I do? I haven't really thought about you saying yes. So we communicated back and forth, got it to a point where we go, okay, this is what we could do, rough ideas. And then I through my contacts at work, made contact with prisons across the southwest, and just wrote to them saying, "Would you be interested in a haiku project for your prisoners?" And they said yes, which then meant, oh God, I really have to do something now. So we had a group that we were now working with, and we had prisons involved. And so that was where Pen and Corrections was really formed. It was this kind of through this fortuitous just reaching out to people and saying, do you think this is a good idea? And in forming it, another kind of why developed, which was, I wanted to test then, could haiku be delivered remotely, because we were in lockdown, so I wasn't going to get into the prisons, and would this be enough to draw people in to this form of poetry? And a very interesting kind of question that I was asking was, could haiku work in a prison setting, a setting that's typically lacking in access to nature and the seasons? And so that became another kind of goal to answer those questions. I guess my kind of approach of reaching out to people has served me pretty well. Certainly during lockdown, I've reached out to Jimmy, who runs the People's Poetry Podcast, and he kind of invited me on. I reached out to you, Patricia, and you invited me on. David got on board. So, and I also during this the development of the project, I reached out to the daughter of Johnny Borinsky, so Amy Borinsky, and to talk to her about using her dad's haiku in the project. So yeah, I mean, there was lots of generosity, but that probably says, the fact that I got all these people involved and have been invited on things probably says more about their generosity than my ability to negotiate these things. So, but I mentioned Johnny Borinsky, and his daughter allowed me to use some of Johnny's haiku in the lessons that we developed for the Pen and Corrections project. And Johnny was a haiku poet from North America. He died in 2018. He'd been writing haiku since 1975 and had published 8 books. During his life, Johnny served several prison sentences for non-violent protests to war and Trident nuclear weapon systems. And whilst in prison, he wrote a lot of haiku. So this was quite a quick answer to one of the kind of goals, and one of the whys of the project was, yes, haiku can be written in prison by prisoners, and it can be very successful. So it kind of spurred us on, really, knowing this, reading his poetry. So here is one of Johnny's haiku, and I'll just read it to you. In 10 summers, the convict's first visit, dragonfly. In 10 summers, the convict's first visit, dragonfly. So what do we do? Well, as I said, we had some prisons involved or showing an interest. Initially, there were 9 prisons that said yes, they'd like to take part in the project. Eventually, that whittled down, and only 2 actually took part, and that's HMP Eastwood, which is in Gloucestershire, and HMP Ashfield, which also is in Gloucestershire. So we developed a pack of a haiku lesson pack, which was emailed to prison staff. So we had a single point of contact within both the prisons that we had to go through. So we emailed a lesson document out to them. That was then given to any prisoners that were interested in getting involved. That paper, that lesson pack had space for the prisoners to develop and write their own haiku. Once they were written, they they were scanned and sent back to us, and myself and David then wrote bespoke comments and suggestions for each of the prisoners that had written haiku, and these were sent back. And then we had final submissions, so we eventually got a kind of final version of each haiku sent back to us, and we then collated them. So that writing phase ran from November 2020 to February 2021. Before I go on and read you some of the haiku that were produced and tell you about the kind of end of the project, I thought it was important to just pick up on some of the things we learnt whilst doing this project. So one of the things was, certainly I learnt about the acceptable language that needed to be used when you're communicating with people in prison. So and David Breakspear was really helpful in making sure the way I communicated was easy to understand, making sure the terminology was clear. Prison governance was something that I had to get my head around. How do we communicate people into and out of the prison? What can be said, what can't be said? And in developing the lesson pack, I had a conversation with the haiku poet Paul Chambers, and he put me on to Jack Kerouac's haiku, and they were very useful in kind of showing a haiku, haiku that might be more accepted by the audience that we were targeting. I quickly learned the amount of time it takes to gather stuff from prisoners and prisons. It's a slow, old process, sending stuff off, waiting, sometimes weeks for any sort of response. So it isn't an audience and a setting that is quick. It takes a long time to write responses to people's creative writing. So you get stuff back and you've got to write a sensitive, useful, constructive response for them, and it takes some time. So we had 13 prisoners who got involved in the project at first. 9 eventually submitted final haiku. It was interesting that initially the remote access to prisoners seemed a bit of a barrier, and I think maybe in some ways it was, but it certainly got us round any issues of geography. The project could be delivered to anywhere in the country because it's done remotely, and possibly it's less daunting. You can you're not face to face with people, and maybe that's some good for some individuals. As I said, we started with 13 prisoners. Some of them dropped out. That was something that we had to learn about and deal with, that people didn't stick the program out. Not everyone did. Most of them did, but not all of them. And some of them were released during the project, so it was hard to follow up with them. But I guess importantly, what we did learn was that it works. People are generous. Prison officers were generous. The prisoners themselves were generous in their time and their effort. And the prisoners are brave. They communicated and shared their poetry, their creative writing with people that they've never met. So it was a kind of, I was honoured that people would do that. So here are some of the haiku. So we ended up with 15 haiku. I'm going to read you 3 of them. For prison governance reasons, we can only use people's first names so that there is confidentiality. So I will read you these. Saying your name at first light, birds are calling. Saying your name at first light, birds are calling. That's by Clive. Early Sunday morning, from my cell I watch mother birds gathering food. Early Sunday morning, from my cell I watch mother birds gathering food. Rachel. And dark winter sky, my whistles blown across the cathedral grounds. Dark winter sky, my whistles blown across the cathedral grounds. Elaine. So, to conclude, just some thoughts of myself and David and Ollie, Ollie Francis, who has come on board with the project to help us pull the final bit together. So we have pulled we've collated all of the 15 haiku, and Ollie has done a wonderful, amazing job of turning them into a really gorgeous looking book. And in reading the poems, when I sent them to Ollie, he came back with some thoughts which I wanted to use here in conclusion. Ollie said that the poems really showed to him that the little things for this, for the authors, for the poets, matter. He talked about how us and in the outside world, so not in prison, don't often stop to focus on the things around us, on the little things. But here we have an audience that have been taken out of the big wide world, taken out of normal life, and for them he got this real sense that real little things really mattered, and maybe lockdown has kind of highlighted that for us, that there are the little things in life really do matter. For me, I think the project has really been about generosity. It's really been about people reaching out to each other, sharing, giving up their time, being brave and confident and stepping out of their comfort zone, and has really has really created a kind of bond between prison and people, us on the outside world. For David, he talked about collaboration, and he's really talked about, I spoke with him yesterday, he was also talking about collaboration then. He and I collaborated over this project. We've never met in person, me and David. We've only met via Zoom. Prisons and us collaborated, and the prisoners and us have collaborated. So now we're at a stage that we kind of want one more moment of collaboration and generosity, and we're going to launch a Kickstarter campaign, which, if you go to our new website, which is www.penandcorrections.com, you can register you can find out more about the project, and you can register your interest in the Kickstarter campaign for the book. So we are looking to raise some funds to get the book produced, printed, and then sent out to anyone that supports it. Any profits that come from that are going back into 2 charities that support the children or with parents in prison. So that's Children Heard and Seen and Storybook Dads. One last tiny little thing that I thought was really nice and I wanted to share with everyone was I was talking to my colleagues across the Southwest, so the other commissioners in all the local authorities across the Southwest, and I told them about the project via email, and the wonderful, hilarious Gary Wallace, who is the public health specialist from Plymouth, was very, very complimentary about the project. He thought it was a great idea, and I said to him, it's a really nice project to be doing, and one thing that's really nice about it is that we're not having to measure outcomes or outputs or monitor loads of any sort of data. It's simply doing it for the love of watching something grow and getting people involved. And he said that was a lesson for every commissioner everywhere, that we needed to do stuff with people, not to people, and treat them as adults, as equals. It doesn't matter what it is, just do something based in equality, fraternity, and empathy. Getting prisoners who are unused to expressing themselves in pro-social ways to express themselves is an amazingly positive thing to do. So I was chuffed with that, and I thought it really summed up everything nicely. Thank you for listening.
First of all, thank you very much for that. It was really, really fascinating. And what I liked about it is it's really something I believe in, the sharing of haiku. I think your friend Gary summed it up well when he said that there's a certain joy in seeing something, in collaborating with other people and seeing it grow, especially when it's doing some good. I mean, from what you've said, it didn't just do the prisoners some good. You got a lot of joy out of doing it as well.
Yeah. It was like I said, I feel touched and honored that I would have been immensely proud if one person had said, oh, I'll take part in that. To get 13 initially and then 9 to stick out the course of a project without ever meeting anyone, it was wonderful, really.
I just wondered, when you said that, I wondered about that, because you said, first of all, it was really slow getting the response. So there was no immediacy of response. And then you lost 4 people. Like you said, people leave prison. Thank goodness. That's how as it should be.
Yeah.
But how did you keep yourself motivated when you were getting dropouts and you were getting a slow response time?
I think because I've been working throughout lockdown, and I've got 3 kids. I think actually the number that we had was a manageable number. So I had enough to do, keeping in regular contact with the prison. So I would email the prisons every Monday morning, just saying, how's it going? Is anyone else involved? Do you need any help with anything? So I would be keeping in regular contact with them. But then sending, so myself and David ended up doing feedback, reasonably kind of extensive feedback for all 13 individuals, and that was probably enough. I think if the project had kind of been any bigger, it would have been very difficult to manage alongside work.
Yeah, that's a good point, that you had to write all the, I mean, when the responses came back to you, you did have to write a response to that response. So yeah, that's a lot of work. I know.
Yeah.
I was also intrigued. You said you were a little bit worried when you set out that you didn't know enough.
Yeah.
Did you? Or were you okay?
Did I know enough? I think so. And I had like I had the generosity of lots of people to look over what I was planning, what I was saying in the lesson pack. So yeah, I think I did know enough. Certainly enough that the end results, from my perspective, were very impressive. For people who none of them had written haiku before, they were getting the lesson and then feedback only in writing. So there was no face-to-face or even verbal contact. I was very impressed with what they produced in the end. So I must have done something right, I guess. I guess one thing I didn't mention was we ran a competition as well. So all 15 haiku went into a competition, and Ian Storr of Presence Journal selected his favorite, which is going to be published in one of the upcoming journals. So and he was very complimentary about the final haiku. So yeah, so I guess I did something right.
Well,
And I'm
I liked the three you showed us. I thought they were very good. I had a particular favorite. I'm not sure who wrote it, but it was the one which was about the Sunday morning and watching
yes,
the mother birds picking up the
yeah,
food.
Rachel,
Oh, heartbreaking.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and
I thought that was really good.
yeah, and I think there's I think they feel more, almost more poignant because you know where the people are that are writing them.
Yeah.
You know, probably more so than any. You know, if you read a haiku journal, you don't know where that person is, but we really, you can really visualize the individuals that are writing these haiku. Um, yeah, so it makes them, it does kind of heighten certainly the kind of sense of emotion in them, I think.
Mm. And as Ollie said, you can really tell the little things that are important when everything's been shaved away. I mean, we've all got
Yeah,
an inkling
yeah,
of this with the lockdown, but
yeah,
it's nowhere near the same as being in prison and having all your rights and taken away from you. But
yeah, absolutely.
I got the feeling, as Ollie said, that you could really see what is important at the end of the day, and they were able to articulate that very well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
one of the questions I was going to ask you,
Mm,
but I think you've probably answered it. But you said that you sent the packet as a written
mhm.
lesson. I thought that was interesting because when you first told me about it, I thought you would be able to do some sort of Zoom um, idea. So literally, you were sending a written instruction, and then what the prison authorities would deliver that to the individual poet. The poet would take it in and just send it back via the same route, as it were.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it was a four-side um, introduction to haiku. So it had some of Johnny's poems in there, some poems from my friends, Jack Kerouac's haiku in there, um, and then it had literally a page at the back that was broken down into some boxes so that people could handwrite their haiku. They were then scanned and sent back to me. Um, yeah, so I mean, I was pleased. Over the moon. I'm over the moon that it worked. But yeah, so I I can kind of imagine what happened in the prison, but it would be really interesting to actually understand um, what it was like for the prison guards and the people sitting in their cells, because I think, and I might be wrong, that during lockdown a lot of prisoners have been locked down in their prisons, so they would have been in their cells for longer than they would have normally been.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
So it probably was a very useful exercise for them to be able to focus on something
yeah, I
almost
think so.
outside the cell. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, interestingly, I did wonder whether, like I said in the presentation, I wondered whether it would be a form that worked because they aren't exposed to the outside world. But actually, I think it created a link for them to the outside world, allowed them to remember and reflect on the outside world, and hopefully transported them there. Yeah, so yeah, over the moon really with the response and the end product. So
And of course, as you said, the end product is going to become a book.
mm-hmm.
You've got the Kickstarter. Well, you've got the idea of the Kickstarter. Any idea when you'll probably get it going?
We're hoping for right at the beginning of April. Um, we've just got to do a bit more planning, but yeah, but as I say, if you go to www.penandcorrections.com, there is a place for you to drop your email in, and then you'll be kept updated about when the Kickstarter goes live.
Okay, and I'll put that link on the show notes so people
Thank you.
can click on there as well.
Brilliant.
Just before we wrap up, There were a couple of last things. Well, one really, you discovered Johnny Baranski. How?
How? I think his name was given to me by Michael Dylan Welsh.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think it was either him or Ian Storr, one of the two. I certainly Michael put me on to his daughter, and then in my typical kind of I'm just going to go and ask somebody fashion, I went and asked Amy. I emailed Amy and said, "Can I use some of your dad's haiku in this project, please?" And she was like, "Yeah, of course, wonderful." Sent me loads of stuff. So yeah, and that was a real kind of stumbling across his haiku was a real boost for me, because it made me think, actually, this could work, and there is a kind of audience for it. Yeah, his poems are wonderful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the one you shared with us. Thank you for that. So, Ted, thank you very much for coming along and telling us about your really worthy haiku project.
Thank you.
And as I said before, I'll put the contact details on the show notes, so if people want to register some interest with you, they can. And there may be some people who are listening today who would like to run a project similar to yours in their own territories, because the podcast has a global audience.
Yeah.
Is it okay if they contact you also through the
absolutely.
website? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Yep. So thank you once again for coming along and talking to us about your project. I look forward to telling people that the Kickstarter's up and running and that the book is out, and we'll keep everyone posted through the podcast. Thanks so much, Ted.
Thank you.